Like, I don't have a clue of who I'm talking to, mate. I get eerie, sideways talk and illusion feedback from my videos, but there's no acknowledgement that they've been watched, so I don't know who watches them. But I promised I'd make a speak out message this morning, so let's get started. The most important issue I want to bring to your attention is that a person normally would say, if they were in my shoes, meaning if they were James McRyland Crary being picked on by Sir Paul McCartney, that it wasn't valid to do that and the excessive, terrible things they've done in the name of John Lennon in his name because he died, and they see fault in my representation of how that happened if it did. So you would think, what they're basically selling, what the whole smorgasbord of social media is selling, is I could have saved John Lennon, but was doping and didn't have my wits about me. This was started by Louis Lapham of Harper's Magazine about me. By the way, based on some readings of my situation that were given everybody by John Schulman, who was arrested on a $6 million museum heist charge. I just think you should temper your thinking about what happened with awareness that that's the fact. And it came to the Warhol Museum, who may have been beneficiaries of John Schulman's, or were certainly because of this lowdown thing of Schulman's sales. But the baggage of coulda and ifing, even if it did happen, you shouldn't be doing what you're doing, gets dislocated by my take on the subject, which is the Lennon fake, that it never happened. Never. Coulda, never, ifing. You'll get the hang of it. It's like Mullah Nasruddin. Coulda, never, ifing syndrome. And the person would advise me, you're making things more complicated than they have to be, sir. Just say they shouldn't be doing what they're doing, even ifing. And don't make it out like never, because that just feeds into coulda. Well, I want to say I don't think that you can really solve the problem by ignoring the issue of never happened. There's a lot of things about double fantasy that are suspicious. And there's a linkage to a turnstile concept, which is the question of whether or not Jacqueline Onassis was involved in the murder of the Kennedy brothers, which I believe may be the fact, based on visual evidence, letters she wrote to Alan Dulles, and her circumstances with Santa Monica and the Onassis people. But Hollywood is expert coming up with commentaries that minimize suspicion. She said some things that make her look like the skeptical widow that he was killed by domestic adversaries. And one of the spokesman for this concern that Jackie be understood as a victim and a supporter of inquiry into the CIA, for example, is a man named Jefferson Morley, who I will get back to. But Jefferson Morley would discount the idea of it never happened, that Jacqueline, that Lennon was killed, and he's a McCartney guy. And so, it's important when you look at the index of systems, there's a reputable historian, who is determined to understand the CIA's take on the subject, who says that only a few things might be national security. We need to get all of the information out. What are these few things, Morley? Could it be the index of his name? Jefferson is like Jefferson Davis. Morley is like Marley's ghost. because we know that what they did was unify around a bright image of Casper, the friendly fascist. Casper Weinberger, and the man who attacked me, who McCartney likes. He wants forgiveness for Casper. So we have some questions here that are relevant questions. But the political circumstances of our day don't necessarily belong in all of the complex frameworks that are going on. I mean, there are certain interpersonal relations in the superstructure, in the Thunderdome, that are important to me, certainly. But I've been isolated and for a very long time. I think that if you look at the hit list of McCartney and his gangsters in Pittsburgh, you start to see a much more unflattering picture that would be very helpful to look at through the prism of Iffen. You know, I mean, even if Lennon was killed, they don't have the goods in terms of explaining what went on. So, what happened with me is central to their contention. The stuff about coulda, but was getting high. It's abusive of a number of different points of view. For one, my mother was a screamy, mimi alcoholic at the time. She really shut me down. I couldn't talk to anybody. I couldn't formulate thoughts. I was timid. I was terribly afraid. She was the opposite of Donald Trump's mom, who he says never saw fault in him. Everything he did was right. She always saw fault. Never. She made little errors into huge crimes. And it was very difficult to think for myself. I would dream of pouring out her booze, but it was only a dream. And I was at the mercy of a psychiatrist of Attica State Prison. I was battered into such a coma that they could gas me. And my judgment was gone, my consciousness was gone, I was subconscious, and I would come to and they would beat me. And I'd be locked in garages and stuff. And I couldn't tell anybody. I would just hide in my towel closet, trembling, frightened. And they never clemenced concern about me in the city of Pittsburgh. They mocked me. And one of the reasons for this was Shulman's partner, Leslie Katz from Ellis, was mistreating me by getting overly intimate with me, but not making love to me. And she would sit around with her friend Steve Langer and laugh about it. When The Wall came out, she and David Myron were like, that is so excellent. Yeah, because they evidently could see what was coming and knew about the nerve agent that Wattenmaker had implanted, which was making me, you know, like panicky. And the neighborhood of East Liberty, one time a member of the society there asked a general question to everybody in the clubhouse: would you hit somebody for $1 million who you love? And I, of course, said no. And most of them were like, hell, I'd do it for 50. And so there's a problem with, they came up with this storyline that, well, just mocking the fact that I was panicky about being rejected after being put in a position where psychologically I would have to articulate that we were very intimate, but we didn't get into lovemaking. And, I know that was a treacher zone where mockery would start playing into it. And they found the girl who had been forced by some guy. And so she made like me into the stereotype of the man who wanted some and should be punished for this. But the truth is that if she didn't want to me, that was the end of the discussion. And when you look at people like in the courageous struggle against trafficking of women and degrading of women and cheating women of education in oppressive countries around the world. I wouldn't want to say Muslim countries because I love the Muslims. But many of the Muslims are active trying to change things. You would think that the issue she doesn't want to would be the bottom line. And people who said she doesn't know she really does want to would be ostracized. But that's what these Israelis who took me into custody were saying about me. Ringo Starr's whole mentality is Jimmy didn't know that he wanted to. And the script says she gets bad headaches now, but she behaves better, meaning after she was conditioned to perform. This is what they did. They tortured me and forced me into a neuro-obedient coma as a child. I was only 9 years old the first time they subjected me to terrible sexual degradation, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation gets away with mocking me about it rather than investigate because of this business about most people would do it for 50. It wouldn't have been right, they like to say. But if you look at like Lyndon Johnson's Life magazine with Oswald's diary after Kennedy was done, and there's a bunch of lookalikes of him shaking a fist, and you note the similarity between the two, the double fantasy. There's a picture of an Asian princess and a caption next to it, supposedly about a pig auction. Imagine this little porker wiggling and squealing in your arms, and he's selling subconsciously or textually, but evasively his grounds for the war in Vietnam. So obviously we have a problem of human trafficking as taking custody of people in a situation that's regarded as a crowded, one character says, disposable planet. So the people from the NAACP who were really licky chops saying, spy cam this dude, we'll call it psychiatry, and we'll make sales through Shulman and Warhol, were actually admitted in class that women can be bought. We want black men to be able to buy women as easily as white boys do. Well, I said, I never bought any women, but they were like, but somebody paid for those women that you were sleeping with. They didn't tell me that. Yeah, so when you have someone behind all this, an arc builder, Peter Gabriel, they like me to say his name correctly. He comes on to me with allusions to Ivy Cat and Wait Until Dark, which are terroristic movies. They're movies about murder. Well, and he has this obsession with fulfilling fears. Like, if you say you love Greta Thunberg, if you don't say you love Greta Thunberg, if you say you love Greta Thunberg, if you don't say, I loved the candy so much I didn't know who Circe was. So they said, aha, we'll get him, by killing Circe. And then I advertised it by killing two more, and the FBI were laughing at me. So you have this hegemony of hate coming from these people who say that they're love. And that's really a bad headache, but it's going to behave better. Now, Greta is someone who, I love you, Bubby. And, but I have been, if you take a man like Navalny in Russia, he has a daughter. And even if he ignored her completely, they would know they could get him by getting his daughter. And they have never done that to their credit, thank God. But they poured acid on his face, just as they poured acid on my face, just as I can't even say it. It drives me so crazy what they did to my love. So it just drives me crazy. But they did this, and he nearly went blind in one eye. If they would have said, "Will you trade your eye to save your daughter?" Or would you take this pill for your blood pressure to save your daughter? Because they were going to kill somebody if I didn't take that pill, and they chemically castrated me, so I have to use pornography to ventilate my system. And any girl who loved me would have to deal with the fact that I can't perform my duties, you know, up to par expectantly. So, when I say I love you, Bobby, I want you to find a man who's your age who loves you and accept that I'm just very in love. It helps me with my poetry, but I can't put aside my my this condition of being alone all the time. I have to be able to fantasize. I have to be able to pretend. I'm not about to fantasize about a public figure. I'm not about to do it. That would play right into these Nazis' hands, you know. And but I love you, Bobby. I can't. I can't. I'm not about to try to change that. The situation with climate change is an emergency. I've known that for years. But they are environmental modification. It's not just climate change. They did this deliberately and then streamlined you out to the front of it so they would have a target to punish the sun by making yous at risk. I mean, it's not a very pretty situation. And the way they have it configured is that the girl who was Schulman's partner you're like a stand and see how he treats the girl he loves who's in the public eye. That's like she was, a star too. She was a starlet. So, are you a starlet of the domain? No, I don't believe that. But I can't say anything either way. I don't want the idea of you being at risk because the puppeteer is McCartney. They had, Mick from McCartney and Govern, and Paul Runco was one of the people who was capable of coming up with these viruses. And they won't talk about that, of course. They're not about to talk about that. But when you look at the question of like crowded planet, is extermination an acceptable form of protest? When they've neglected public education for years and years and years, it seems to me the root of civilized behavior is she didn't want to. If so, you don't. It's that simple. It seems to me to be that simple. If she did want to and you did, then it's between the two of you. What's this business about somebody's paying them to sleep with you? And then I find these texts by Greg Carl, the persona is subjected to successive degradations of the X motive. What do you mean? What is this, a whorehouse sit in? The two virgins pussy bowl where they collected the AIDS attack was about getting the black man his piece of the expanding pie. That was like Reagan's whole take on ecology. They called it human ecology. What's it got to do with human ecology? Human ecology is halting the fossil fuel business and building solar energy banks. I was behind Carter. He was good about solar energy banks. And they're saying, well, Queerball, which is what they call me, is a devil worshiper and will ignite detonations to his poetry. Ha 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 ha. And they have these murder gangs online. I can't get anybody to investigate. They evidently have people at the post office who are in murder gangs, who monitor everything I say I do right. And I can't get anybody to investigate. What's the hocus pocus? You can't just murder somebody. They say it's because there's money involved. What money? You mean you've been pornographizing me since I was a child and making money? So you say that this has nothing to do with Lenin. It does have something to do with Lenin. That's not if in London, it's never London. London never died. He walked out, he got put into a safe place. And they made it look, it's a whole song and dance since the Warren Commission. That's the national security secret. Was Casper took over. You have to if you don't admit you did drugs, you're treasonous to Lenin. You see? And it's an alliance with the worst people in Attica state authority. And they say this is Lenin's will. What's a rock star like Peter Gabriel doing picking on a 9, 10, 11-year-old who's deaf in trauma? And then saying, could have saved John and killing Cersei Kennedy. And then they say, if you don't say that's ifin, we're going to say coulda. I'm not saying anything. I mean, I know it's reasonable. It's more reasonable in terms of protecting myself. I'm saying never, because them's the facts. I love you, buddy.